I think studios are perhaps not a necessary part of the production anymore, the way they used to be, but it's still a place where people can get together, and from that perspective, studios still play a vital role in the industry.
That's Sam Rudy, founder of Pro Studio Time. He believes that while technology has changed how music is made, studios still matter. That's because they're creative spaces where collaboration, inspiration, and quality all come together.
Studios don't like to advertise rates and availability. So you can find studio website online, but in order to see if it's available or suitable, you have to start a conversation. If you want to compare options the same way you'd compare hotel options, for example, then that can be very time consuming.
He explains why artists and bands often struggle to find the right studio fit and how much the project can benefit if just a few of the booking parameters were better understood. Today, he shares how artists can think differently about studios, creativity, and choosing spaces that support better performances and sound quality.
Sometimes a pair of speakers and a decent vocal chain is all you need. More and more, it's about how that space makes you feel.
By the end of this conversation, you'll learn how commercial studios continue to evolve, what really matters when booking a session, and how much an environment can shape music. Stick around. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is the Inner Circle Podcast. Do artists still need commercial studios?
It's a great question, Bobby. I think they do, very much so. Yes, I think studios are perhaps not a necessary part of the production anymore, the way they used to be several decades ago. But it's still a place where people can get together and collaborate. And from that perspective, I think studios still play a vital role in the industry. And it's also a space that can provide inspiration for people. New places, new parts of the world that might fuel creativity for many artists, many bands. People perhaps take this for granted, but quality audio is still a thing, you know? High quality audio is still very much a thing and necessary. Yes, you can make commercially viable music outside studio these days, but not always. So yeah, studios are still very much alive.
Who's your typical client?
I work with clients of all sorts, really, from self-funded projects or people who are, have a day job but are serious about good quality recordings for their bands, which might be a hobby, all the way up to some of the biggest names in the game.
There used to be a service similar to yours in Southern California here, studio referral service.
Yes, that's Ellis Sorkin, which, as far as I'm aware, he's still going and doing a very good job. Ellis and I have actually collaborated on a few jobs. So sometimes this was some time ago, actually. I haven't been in touch with him for some time now. But so if he's listening, a number of years ago, we've collaborated. If he's not all that familiar with perhaps studios in Europe, and I am, then I've been able to help. And there have been times when he has helped me out with studios in the US as well.
Good to hear that he's still going and that you collaborate with them.
As far as I'm aware, yes, he's still very much doing it. Yes.
Is your service more, let's say, European oriented?
I would say that most of my clients come from the UK music industry, but we can work globally. So we can work with we work with studios all around the world. We've sourced studios for clients all around the world, Europe, US. Not too long ago, I was trying to find studios in Mexico for a US client, actually. So there you go. That's also something that happens from time to time.
Well, let's go into the service that you actually provide, because I know it's more than just finding an appropriate studio. You go beyond that, right?
Unlike other industries, studios don't like to advertise rates and availability. So you can find studio website online and you can probably learn a lot about that studio, but in order to see if it's available or what the rates are, or even if it's suitable for your own session, you have to start a conversation. And if you want to compare options the same way you'd compare hotel options, for example, then that can be very time consuming. So in the professional world, managers, labels, etc., they don't always have the time to go through every option and try and figure out what the best option is. And that's where people like myself come into play. We have an extensive network of recording studios that we work with and collaborate with and that we know of. We also help studios in a way because I don't know if you know this, Bobby, I'm sure you do actually, but the vast majority of inquiries that studios receive don't really end up in bookings. I would say that depending on the studio, it's about 20 to 40% of inquiries that actually lead to a booking. They're dealing with a very high volume of inquiries that are not suitable, either because of budget restraints or because they didn't pay enough attention to what the studio was about, or because they get in touch and they're simply not available, but you still have to get back to that client and let them know, and provide the customer service. So we're also a bit of a filter, really, for studios. If I get in touch with a studio asking about availability, is either because they've asked about that particular studio or because after doing a bit of a screening of that session and understanding what the session is about, I believe that studio is suitable for that session. So we take that pain away from studios as well, in a way.
One of the things that was important was, for want of a better term, studio bling. So studios would have to have an SSL or a Neve or, something flashy like that. And they had to have a certain mic collection and whatever in order to be at an acceptable level for a lot of sessions. Is that still the case?
In some cases, yes, but not always. Sometimes booking a studio can be more to do with how people feel in that space, right? You might not need a large format console because you're just recording vocals, but being in a large control room and perhaps bringing a few people that you feel comfortable with is what makes you feel good and what makes you feel like you can perform. There is an element of that going on sometimes booking studios, but I don't think it's a necessary part of booking studios anymore. There are a lot of bookings for very small writing studios that don't have a console. Sometimes a pair of speakers and a decent vocal chain is all you need, and that's all that they require. And more we're seeing that daylight is really something that a lot of people want in the studio. If you're going to be stuck in there for 10, 12 hours, you kind of want to have a bit of daylight coming through. So a dark studio where you can't see, there aren't any windows and you can't see outside is for some people a big no, really.
You were a studio manager prior to starting Pro Studio Time. What did you learn from that? What you learned prompt what you're doing now?
Well, Bobby, I was actually both. I was a studio manager and international booking agent. I started my career at Moloko Studios here in the UK. And they run a similar model, but they're also a studio group and they have studios in London. Yeah, I guess my experience has been different to most studio managers out there. I actually, I started doing this from the very start, not just managing studios alone, but also doing the international bookings for people as well.
But you had time in the studio yourself, so you understood the needs and wants of clients.
We had quite a large portfolio of studios in Moloko, and they still do. So you get to see many scenarios. You get to see many types of sessions and many types of studios and what fits where, etc. You're not confined to 3 or 4 rooms that a studio complex might have, right? Your typical studio manager is looking perhaps after 1 to 5, 6 rooms, something like that. And their knowledge is based around those rooms. My knowledge was based around over 100 studios. So it was about finding the right fit for the various types of sessions that came in.
Well, speaking of types of sessions, I know that you obviously do music bookings, but Do you get called for post sessions as well?
We do get the odd call, but it's not an area that we delve in a lot. It's for the most part writing sessions, recording sessions, writing camps, residential studios as well. That's our bread and butter, really.
Have you ever noticed that mixing vocals is often the hardest part of getting a track to sound right? You boost, you compress, you add effects, and it still doesn't feel professional. So, to make it easier, I put together a simple mini course on vocal mixing that walks you through the exact steps to get the vocals sounding clear and upfront. If you're interested, scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to today's conversation. Okay, let's talk about residential studios, because at one point in time, they were high on the list for, every major client to want. And then they sort of fell out of favor for a while, and I assume it's coming back again. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think so. I think they've gained a lot of popularity in the last 5 or 6 years. I think what makes them popular is, well, firstly, if you live in a city like London or in a city like LA, big city, the ability to go out and not have to commute to the studio every day for, say, a week-long writing camp is quite appealing. Then there's also the tranquility that comes with, normally these places are in the countryside or somewhere pretty quiet and serene. So the tranquility that comes with that is quite appealing to artists. And also a far more flexible approach to recording. So studios in cities are typically bound to strict hours. You have a start time, you have a finish time, you can carry on, but there will be overtime charged. Residential studios tend to be a little bit more flexible with all that. So, if you wanted to start a little bit later one day, that's fine. And if you wanted to go over a little bit, that's fine as well. Usually, not always, but in most cases, it's okay to do that. And I think it's also to do with how music is made these days. Writing camps are almost the norm at this point, I would say. There's a lot of writing camps going on. So yeah, it's about getting everyone there and getting everyone focused on making music.
Writing camps are a fairly new invention, I'd have to say, because they were just not the norm 20 years ago anyway, and mostly because a songwriter, maybe with a partner, maybe with 2 other partners, that was it. But you didn't have, large groups of people getting together to write or even compare notes. I think it's healthy. It's certainly good for your business, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's good because I think we now have a far more fragmented industry when it comes to recording, right? The norm used to be that you'd book a studio for various weeks to maybe make a whole album or perhaps track the rhythm section and then maybe move on to something else. Today, it's a lot more fragmented than that. You have day sessions, a couple of days here and there. So a week-long session is always something that I think every studio around the world is looking forward to because, it helps with the overheads and, calendar management and everything else. At the end of the day, you're running a business. So it's always good.
If you had a major artist, you can almost figure that there'd be months maybe that would be locked out. And now almost all artists have a great studio at home. So they'll use the major studio for tracking or, just to get away or something. But, it's not a whole album that's done anymore. Most of the time anyway.
See, I keep seeing situations where artists that build their own studios and start working out of their own studios end up wanting to book a studio anyway because they want a change of scenery and they want that inspiration that perhaps they've stopped getting at their own studio. So whenever somebody decides to book a studio, I don't think it's ever the end of sessions from those artists. They tend to always come back eventually.
What should an artist look for an outside studio?
Well, it completely depends on what they're trying to do. Sometimes it's a very functional approach. If you are there's a type of inquiry that we deal with relatively often, which is from artists that are touring at the time, and they've perhaps been recording recently and they're getting ready for release, but for whatever reason they've decided they need to re-record a vocal. So we need to find a studio that can record vocals, number one, and ideally one that has a vocal chain that is as close as possible to the vocal chain that they used on the album. So that's an example of a very functional way to book studios. There are other times when it's the complete opposite. It's not about what equipment is in the studio. It's about how that space makes you feel. I'm actually currently dealing with an inquiry. I can't tell you who it's for, but I'm dealing with one right now, it's a major artist. They're looking for studios in LA. And they wanted something off the beaten path. And they wanted something with daylight, something that just felt good to that artist. I think we've managed to find something. I'm not sure. The session isn't confirmed just yet, but I think we've managed to find a solution.
I'd be shocked if you couldn't, to be honest with you, in LA. Now, that being said, when I first moved to LA in 1980, 81, there was something called the studio menu. I forget who used to put it out, but it was like a menu that you'd get in a restaurant. And it listed the name and the phone number of every studio in Los Angeles, every 24 track, which meant a commercial studio. And I remember counting them, and there were 224.
Wow, okay.
Which is a lot. And that's just those that were in the menu, and there were many more. And it's far less than that now, for sure, but still, there's an abundance of places that you can go in Los Angeles. It's surprising. Just within walking distance from me, there's 5, and that are major commercial studios.
Yeah, studios are still going. I think, as I mentioned earlier, yes, perhaps studios are not a necessary part of the production process anymore, the way they used to be several decades ago. You couldn't really make an album without walking into a studio, but they still serve a very important purpose, for sure. And I think we're nowhere close to studios disappearing. I think the threats come from angles you might not expect. I don't know if you are familiar with this, Bobby, but for example, here in the UK, we have an industry body called the Music Producers Guild. And they look after producers and recording studio interests. And they're currently pushing a campaign in Parliament here in the UK to try and lower the business rates for recording studios. Because business rates for recording studios here are not, they don't qualify, the government has decided that they don't qualify for discounts that other types of venues, like, for example, grassroots music venues, qualify for. And so there's a big campaign run by the MPG now doing that, which is great work. And I think that is perhaps more threatening to studios than the lack of work, frankly.
How about AI? How is that affecting studios and the people that you're working with?
Well, I can't say I've seen a direct effect from it just yet. We're still booking studios for artists the way we always have. I guess I can give you my opinion on how things will play out. Personally, I see AI as a tool, really, more than anything else. And tools are always as good as the people using them. So I can't see how this is going to directly impact studios just yet. There will be some disruption for sure, and time will show us what that disruption looks like. I was actually listening to one of your recent guests, who was talking about, I think it was an engineer in Nashville, and I can't quite remember.
Ed C. Yep.
That's it. And he was talking about how people who would book musicians to record demos would perhaps stop booking those musicians and therefore a studio as well, because they could do their demos with AI music making tools. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that will start happening. But I would also encourage people to look at it from the other side. We've seen similar threats in the past, or what were apparently those threats, and everybody always mentions the same examples of drum machines to drummers and synthesizers to orchestras and autotune to singers. But time has proven those theories wrong. And in many cases, some of those tools have shaped the sound of music in some way, right? With new genres or new sounds. And so perhaps the music industry has actually benefited more than it's suffered. So I think for every opportunity for disruption, there's also opportunity for creativity. Perhaps there is a case where somebody who wasn't confident enough to pick up a guitar or a drum kit now finds a way into making music. And once they get a taste for it, maybe that leads to taking the next step, which is to make music with real instruments and real studios. They might just want to have that experience. And so who knows, maybe it's a catalyst for more sessions rather than less. So we'll have to see. Time will tell.
I have a theory that everything cycles around in music, and for the last at least 10 years and probably more, there's so much having to do with technology in creating music. So everything is, I can't say everything, but pop music anyway is based around loops and virtual instruments and things like that. And I have to believe at some point there's going to be an artist that breaks through in such a huge way using real instruments, real players, doing it the traditional way, that sets the trend back the other way. So fingers crossed on that. And of course, that would be good for your business if that happened as well.
For sure. Bobby, the thing is, for as long as someone's willing to pick up a guitar and learn how to play a guitar, how are we going to stop seeing real musicians coming through? I just don't see it. I think it will continue to happen. To me, this represents a new lowering of the bar for access to making music. The same way Pro Tools did, the same way being able to track on a laptop did. We've been through several iterations of the same thing. I think this is just a new version of it. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion.
Sam, you mentioned a while ago about doing demos, about Ed talking about demos and everything. And I know the culture of that here. I'm not aware of what that's like in the UK or Europe in terms of doing demos. Does that still happen where you get musicians together in the studio and do something quickly that roughs out the song? Or is there a different approach?
I don't think it's as often that you see that happening here as in the US. And especially in a place like Nashville, where there's a lot of musicians and very, very good session musicians. So no, I think it's different here. There will be some demos, but they're most likely being recorded in a rehearsal room with some basic multi-tracking gear, just to get a sense for the song and the music, and then they'll just go when they go in the studio, they go to track properly. I don't really ever deal. I probably have dealt at some point with some sessions where people are trying to record a demo, but for the most part, people are either tracking or writing.
How about rehearsal studios? And I don't mean small ones for bands. I mean more like the big ones for artists when they're about to go out and tour. Do you deal with that as well?
I'm afraid not, but perhaps it's an area that we have to look into as well, because why wouldn't we? Yeah, it's a good idea.
Right. It seems natural.
Yes, indeed. It's not that different, is it?
What don't people know about Pro Studio Time that you wish they did?
We've been around for only a couple of years, so we're still relatively new, but we're actually already working with a network of 130 studios or so, I would say, globally, mostly US, UK, and Europe. So we have a pretty good network of studios that we can recommend. There are quite a few studios that are also quite new that people are probably not aware of. A good reason to get in touch is perhaps to discover new locations that you might have not heard of before.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when I hear about new rooms going up. Even in my neighborhood here, there's a studio that I didn't know about it's been around for 5 years, and it's like, oh, really? How did I not know about this? So it does happen. Yeah, it just crossed my mind here, and I'm curious. The Caribbean. Do you have any clients down there?
Not really.
And what brings that up is I think of George Martin's facility down there in Montserrat.
Yeah.
Which is no longer there, but people used to love going there.
I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar, other than G-Jam Studios in Jamaica, I think is the one that most people go to. And that, as far as I'm aware, are still going. But other than G-Jam, I'm not that familiar with studios in that part of the world, if I'm honest with you. So yeah, that's probably something I need to look into.
There's a big one in the Bahamas. I might have talked about somewhere or wrote about. I'll have to go through and look, but it's probably one you should know about because it's a residential facility in the Bahamas. So yeah, I think you want to know about that.
Yes, please. Yes, I'll try to find it, but I might have to drop you an email and remind you to find it for me.
What's the best piece of advice that you learned along the way, or maybe somebody imparted to you?
When things fail, most of the time it's to do with not sticking with it for long enough. If you want to become good at something, if you want to be truly good at something and become better at something, then the most important metric here is volume, volume of iteration. Do it as often as possible and for as long as possible, because the more you do it, the better you get. It might seem obvious, but I think I've in starting my own business and doing this, I've kind of learned this properly now. I've experienced this myself. So yeah, I think that would be the best advice I've been given.
And where do people find you?
ProStudioTime.com. Simple as that. They can just find there's a form you have to fill out where we ask some basic questions about your session, and then we will do our very best to find you the most suitable studio for your project.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time